In the fall of 2019, 21-year-old Ethan Carter moved into a run-down apartment building on the edge of the city. The building wasn't impressive. The paint was peeling from the walls. The elevator only worked when it felt like it, and the hallways always smelled faintly of dust and old carpet. But Ethan didn't care. The rent was cheap. As a college student working 2 part-time jobs, cheap was exactly what he needed. His apartment was on the 3rd floor, apartment 306, directly beside apartment 307. The landlord told him the neighboring apartment was empty. "Has been for years," the old man said while handing over the keys. Ethan didn't think much of it, at least not at first. The first week passed quietly. He attended classes during the day and worked evenings at a grocery store. Most nights he returned home exhausted. The strange events began on the 8th night. Ethan woke suddenly. His room was dark. For a moment he didn't know what had awakened him. Then he heard it, a woman crying. The sound was faint, muffled, as if it were coming through a wall. He sat up in bed. The crying continued. Soft sobs, broken breaths, the kind of crying that sounded genuinely painful. Ethan looked at the clock beside his bed, 3:07 a.m. He listened for nearly 5 minutes before the sound stopped. The silence that followed felt almost unnatural. The next morning he assumed someone had been visiting one of the neighboring apartments. It wasn't a big deal. But the following night, it happened again. 3:07 a.m., the exact same crying, the same woman, the same broken sobs. This time it lasted longer, almost 10 minutes. The third night was worse. The crying sounded closer, louder, and just before it stopped, Ethan thought he heard a whisper, a faint voice hidden beneath the sobbing. He couldn't make out the words. By the 4th night he was irritated. The lack of sleep was becoming a problem. The next afternoon he knocked on several neighboring doors. An older woman answered apartment 308. When Ethan asked if she'd heard the crying, her face immediately changed. The smile disappeared. "You hear it too?" she asked. Ethan felt a chill. "What do you mean?" The woman glanced nervously toward apartment 307, then back at him. "Just ignore it." Before he could ask another question, she quietly closed the door. That evening Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her reaction. Something about it felt wrong. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the crying returned. This time he grabbed his phone and recorded the sound. The sobbing lasted nearly 15 minutes. When it finally ended, Ethan replayed the recording. The crying was there, clear as day, but near the end he heard something else, a whisper, very faint, very distant, almost impossible to understand. He increased the volume, listened again. His blood ran cold. The voice had spoken only 3 words, "Help me, please." The next morning Ethan marched directly to the landlord's office. The old man listened carefully, then sighed. "You should have never recorded it." Ethan frowned. "What?" The landlord rubbed his eyes. "Apartment 307 is empty. I know that." "No," the landlord replied. "You don't understand. It's been empty for 12 years. The room suddenly felt colder. What happened 12 years ago? The landlord hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing you need to know." The conversation ended there, but Ethan wasn't satisfied. That evening he began researching the building online. Hours later he found an old newspaper article. The headline immediately caught his attention. "A local woman missing after apartment disappearance." The article described a 28-year-old woman named Sarah Mitchell. She had vanished without explanation. Her last known address, apartment 307. Ethan stared at the screen. Sarah had disappeared 12 years ago, the exact amount of time apartment 307 had been vacant. Suddenly the pieces began fitting together. The next night the crying returned. But this time there was something different. The woman sounded closer than ever before, as though she were standing directly behind his bedroom wall. Then the whisper came again, only now it was clearer. "Find me." Ethan nearly dropped his phone. The voice sounded desperate, terrified, and unmistakably real. Sleep became impossible. Over the next week, the crying grew worse, every night. Exactly 3:07 a.m., never early, never late. The whispers became longer, more understandable. Some nights he heard, "Please help." Other nights, "He's still here." And once, "Don't let him see you." That message stayed with him. Don't let him see you. Who was he? And what exactly had happened inside apartment 307? Ethan eventually found records showing several tenants had lived beside apartment 307 over the years. Many left unexpectedly. Several had complained about noises. One had even reported hearing a woman crying, just like him. Then Ethan discovered something truly disturbing. One former tenant had disappeared. No forwarding address, no explanation. Gone. The realization terrified him, but it also made him more determined. He needed answers. The following Saturday, he made a decision. He was going inside apartment 307. The landlord refused to provide a key, so Ethan waited until late evening. The hallway was empty, silent. He approached the apartment door. The lock looked ancient. After several minutes of effort, it finally clicked open. The door creaked inward. A wave of stale air drifted out. The apartment was dark, completely empty. Dust covered every surface. Furniture sheets sat untouched in corners. Nothing appeared unusual. For several minutes, Ethan searched room after room. Nothing. No evidence. No clues. No signs anyone had lived there recently. Then he entered the bedroom and froze. The temperature dropped instantly. His flashlight flickered. For a brief moment, he thought he saw someone standing near the far wall. A woman. Pale. Motionless. Then she vanished. Ethan stumbled backward. His heart pounded violently. That's when he heard the whisper. Not through a wall. Not through a recording. Directly behind him. "You're standing where I died." Ethan spun around. Nobody was there. The room was empty. But the voice had been real. He knew it. At that exact moment, his phone began recording automatically inside his pocket. He didn't realize it until later. Terrified, Ethan ran from apartment 307. He moved out 3 days later. He never returned. Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal. Then one evening, curiosity got the better of him. He listened to the final recording from apartment 307. The audio began normally. Footsteps, breathing, doors opening. Then came the whisper. The same words. "You're standing where I died." But that wasn't the worst part. After the whisper ended, another voice appeared. A deep male voice. One Ethan had never heard before. It said, she wasn't the only one. The recording ended immediately afterward. Ethan never listened again. Years later, a friend who still lived in the city sent him a message. The building had new tenants. Apartment 306 was occupied once more. The new resident had filed a complaint. Every night at exactly 3:07 a.m., he heard a man crying through the wall. In the summer of 2021, 32-year-old Ryan Walker decided to spend a weekend hiking alone. Ryan wasn't reckless. He was experienced. Over the previous 10 years, he'd explored dozens of remote trails throughout the country. He knew how to navigate wilderness. He carried emergency supplies, and he always informed someone where he was going. That's why his disappearance made no sense. The trail Ryan chose was located deep within a remote mountain forest. The area was beautiful. Dense pine trees stretched for miles, rocky cliffs overlooked narrow valleys, and long sections of the trail were completely isolated from civilization. Before leaving, Ryan sent his younger sister a text message. A simple one. "Back Sunday night. Don't worry if I lose signal." Those were the last words anyone ever received from him. When Sunday came and went without contact, his family became concerned. By Tuesday, they contacted authorities. A search operation began immediately. Dozens of volunteers combed through the forest. Drones scanned the terrain. Search dogs followed Ryan's scent for several miles. But they found nothing. No backpack, no clothing, no footprints, nothing. It was as if he had simply vanished. Then, 4 days later, a volunteer discovered something unusual. Ryan's camera. It was lying at a narrow trail near an abandoned fire lookout tower. The camera wasn't damaged. In fact, it looked almost untouched. Investigators hoped it would provide answers. Instead, it created an even bigger mystery. Back at the station, detectives reviewed the photographs. The first images seemed completely normal. Beautiful landscapes, wildlife, mountain views, nothing unusual. Ryan appeared relaxed and happy throughout the trip. But around halfway through the collection, one investigator noticed something strange. In the background of a forest photograph, a figure stood between two trees. The figure was distant, almost impossible to see. At first, they assumed it was another hiker, but there was a problem. Nobody else had reported being on that section of trail. The image was enlarged. The figure remained blurry, yet one thing was obvious. Whoever it was appeared to be watching Ryan. The discovery unsettled investigators. Still, it wasn't enough to suggest foul play. Then they reviewed the next photographs. The figure appeared again, and again, and again, each time a little closer, each time more visible. A chill spread through the room as detectives arranged the images in chronological order. The pattern was undeniable. Someone or something had been following Ryan throughout the forest. The earliest image showed the figure nearly 100 yards away. The next image showed it closer, then closer still. Yet Ryan never seemed aware of its presence. In every photograph, he continued taking pictures of scenery, trees, mountains, streams, completely unaware. Hours later, investigators reached the final 20 photographs. The atmosphere in the room changed immediately. Ryan's behavior appeared different. The images became rushed, unsteady, poorly framed, almost frantic. It looked as though he had finally noticed something. One image showed the forest floor, another showed a blurred tree trunk, another captured only part of the sky. It was as if he had suddenly started running. Then investigators noticed something horrifying. The figure was no longer hiding in the distance. It now occupied large portions of the frame, standing behind trees, peering from shadows, watching, always watching. One detective later admitted that viewing the photographs made him physically uncomfortable. There was something wrong about the figure. Its proportions seemed unnatural. Its posture appeared rigid, almost frozen, like a mannequin standing in the woods. Yet it somehow moved between every photograph. The final 10 images became increasingly chaotic. Ryan was definitely running. Branches streaked across frames. The ground blurred beneath him. One image captured a glimpse of his own hand, shaking violently. Then came the final photograph, the last image Ryan ever took. At first glance, it appeared useless. The picture was almost completely blurred. Nothing recognizable could be seen. Investigators initially dismissed it, but weeks later, a forensic imaging specialist decided to enhance the file. What emerged shocked everyone involved. Hidden within the blur was a human face, extremely close to the camera, only inches away. The eyes stared directly into the lens, the mouth hung slightly open. The expression looked empty, lifeless. The image spread quickly among investigators. No one recognized the person until an older officer entered the room. The moment he saw the photograph, his expression changed. He immediately requested access to archived case files. Hours later, he returned carrying a worn folder. Inside was a missing person report from 12 years earlier. A man named Daniel Cross. Daniel had disappeared while hiking in the exact same forest. Search teams never found him. No body, no evidence, no explanation. Just another disappearance. The officer placed Daniel's driver's license photo beside the enhanced image. The resemblance was undeniable. The face in Ryan's final photograph belonged to Daniel Cross, a man who should have been missing for over a decade. The revelation stunned everyone. How could a missing hiker appear in Ryan's final moments? Some investigators believed the image had been misidentified. Others weren't so sure. The case attracted widespread attention. Internet forums exploded with theories. People speculated about serial killers, cults, cover-ups, even supernatural explanations. But no theory explained the most disturbing detail. Investigators returned to Daniel's old case file. Among his belongings recovered before his disappearance was a disposable camera. Most of the film had been ruined, but one surviving photograph remained. The image showed a forest trail, nothing unusual at first glance, until they enlarged the background. Standing between two trees was a distant figure, watching Daniel. The exact same figure that had appeared behind Ryan. The room fell silent. For the first time, detectives considered the possibility that both disappearances were connected. And perhaps not the only ones. A review of older cases revealed several missing hikers over the previous 20 years. Many vanished within the same section of forest. Many left behind cameras. And in several surviving photographs, investigators discovered something chilling. A distant figure, always watching, always getting closer. Months later, authorities closed the trail permanently. Officially, they cited safety concerns. Unofficially, many believed the real reason was fear. Search teams continued looking for Ryan. They never found him. No remains, no equipment, no trace. Years passed. The mystery slowly faded from public attention. Then another incident occurred. A wildlife photographer entered the restricted area illegally. When he returned, he claimed he had seen someone standing among the trees, watching him, motionless. The photographer managed to capture several images before leaving. Authorities later reviewed the photographs. In the first image, the figure appeared far away. In the second image, it had moved closer. In the third image, it stood only a few yards behind him. The fourth photograph was never released publicly. According to rumors, it showed the figure standing directly behind the photographer, looking over his shoulder. The photographer refused all interviews afterward. He sold his equipment, moved to another state, and never entered a forest again. To this day, Ryan Walker remains missing. No one knows what happened to him. No one knows who or what appeared in those photographs. But if the stories are true, Ryan wasn't alone in those woods, and he may never have been. By the winter of 2023, Marcus Reed had spent nearly 7 years working as a night security guard. The job was usually uneventful. Most nights consisted of quiet hallways, occasional maintenance checks, and long hours spent watching security monitors. Marcus preferred it that way. Silence didn't bother him. In fact, he enjoyed it. The office building he worked in stood 20 stories tall in the center of downtown. During the day, thousands of employees filled its halls. But after midnight, the building felt like an entirely different world. Empty, silent, almost abandoned. Marcus worked alone during overnight shifts. From midnight until sunrise, the entire building was his responsibility. Everything remained normal until a series of strange motion alarms began triggering on the 13th floor. The first incident occurred shortly after 2 a.m. A notification flashed across his monitor. Motion detected, floor 13. Marcus frowned. The floor had been vacant for nearly a year. No tenants, no employees, no reason for anyone to be there. Assuming it was a technical issue, he checked the camera feed. The hallway was empty. Nothing moved. No person, no animal, nothing. He reset the system and continued working. 10 minutes later, the alarm triggered again. Same floor, same hallway, still nothing visible. The problem continued throughout the week. Every night, always between 2 and 3 a.m. Always on the 13th floor. Maintenance technicians inspected the sensors. Everything functioned perfectly. No faults, no errors, no explanation. Marcus tried ignoring it, but eventually curiosity got the better of him. One night, he decided to investigate personally. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the alarm activated again. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and entered the elevator. The ride felt unusually long. The doors finally opened onto the 13th floor. Silence greeted him. The hallway stretched ahead beneath dim emergency lighting. Every office was dark. Every door closed. Nothing appeared unusual. He walked the entire floor, found nothing, and returned downstairs. Yet the moment he sat back at his desk, another alarm triggered. Marcus immediately pulled up the camera feed. His stomach tightened. For a split second, he thought he saw movement. A dark shape crossing the end of the corridor. It vanished almost instantly. He replayed the footage repeatedly. The figure appeared for less than a second, too brief to identify, too clear to ignore. The following night, Marcus began recording copies of the security footage. The strange shadow returned, again and again, always brief, always distant. But each night it seemed to remain visible slightly longer. At first it appeared for a fraction of a second, then 2 seconds, then 5. Soon Marcus could clearly make out a human-shaped silhouette, tall, thin, standing motionless at the far end of the hallway, watching. The sight disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. Still, he told nobody. He feared sounding ridiculous. Weeks passed. The figure continued appearing, and growing clearer. One evening, Marcus decided to review archived recordings from previous years. Maybe the problem wasn't new. Maybe he'd simply been the first person to notice it. He searched older files. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The shadow had been appearing for years, 5 years, maybe longer. At first, it was barely visible, a dark blur, a camera glitch, easy to dismiss, but over time it gradually became more distinct, as if it were slowly emerging, frame by frame, year by year. Marcus spent hours examining the footage. Then he found something even stranger. An incident report dated 14 years earlier. The report mentioned a missing employee, a financial analyst named Thomas Avery. According to records, Thomas had worked late one evening on the 13th floor. Security footage showed him entering at 8:43 p.m., but there was no footage of him leaving. None. Police investigated extensively. They searched the building, interviewed employees, reviewed every camera angle. Thomas was never found. The case remained unsolved. Marcus felt increasingly uneasy. Something about the timing bothered him. The shadow began appearing shortly after Thomas vanished. Could it be connected? The idea sounded absurd, yet he couldn't ignore the possibility. Several nights later, the alarms intensified. Instead of 1 or 2 alerts, dozens appeared. The system activated continuously. Every few minutes, Marcus watched the monitors nervously. The shadow now appeared clearly visible. Standing in the center of the hallway, no longer hiding, no longer distant, just waiting. Then something happened that changed everything. At exactly 2:31 a.m., the figure moved. Not a flicker, not a blur, a deliberate step forward. Marcus froze. The cameras had captured movement. Slow, unnatural. The figure walked several feet before stopping. The recording ended moments later. Marcus immediately contacted building management. They dismissed the footage, claimed it was likely a technical malfunction. But Marcus knew what he had seen, and deep down, he feared it was only beginning. The next night, he arrived early, determined to monitor the cameras carefully. For hours, nothing happened. Then, at 2:14 a.m., every monitor briefly flickered. When the image stabilized, the figure stood closer than ever before. Only 20 feet from the camera, Marcus could now see details: a suit, dark hair, a pale face, human, completely human. Yet something felt wrong. The figure never blinked, never shifted, never breathed. It simply stared toward the camera, as though aware it was being watched. Marcus couldn't look away. Then the figure slowly raised one hand and pointed directly at the lens. The screen immediately went black. Several seconds later, the feed returned. The hallway was empty. Marcus barely slept after that. The following week became unbearable. Every night the figure appeared closer. Every night the alarms grew louder. And every night Marcus felt watched, even when sitting alone in the security office. Then came the final incident, the event that caused him to quit. It began shortly after 2 a.m. The motion alarms activated simultaneously across every camera on the 13th floor, every single one. Marcus opened the feeds. His heart nearly stopped. The figure stood directly in front of each camera. Impossible. The same person appeared in multiple locations at once, staring, waiting, watching. Then all screens went black for nearly 30 seconds. When the image returned, every hallway was empty, except one, the central corridor. At the far end stood a man, clearly visible. No shadow, no blur. A man. Marcus immediately recognized the face from the missing person report. Thomas Avery, the employee who had vanished 14 years earlier. Thomas stared directly into the camera, then slowly smiled. The lights throughout the floor abruptly shut off. The feed ended. Marcus rushed to call emergency services, but before he could dial, another alert appeared. Motion detected. Security office. Marcus froze. He was alone, or at least he thought he was. Slowly he turned toward the office doorway. The hallway beyond was empty, silent, dark. Then he noticed something reflected in the monitor beside him. A figure standing directly behind his chair. Marcus spun around. Nothing was there. The room was empty. Yet the reflection remained visible on the monitor. Watching him, smiling, Marcus ran. He abandoned his shift, left the building, and never returned. Several weeks later, another guard replaced him. Building management refused to discuss the incident publicly. Life moved on, at least for everyone else. 6 months later, an internal audit uncovered something disturbing. A camera hidden within the security office had continued recording that night after Marcus fled. The footage showed the room sitting empty for nearly an hour. Then, at exactly 3:07 a.m., the office door opened. A man entered. The camera quality was poor, but investigators claimed the figure resembled Thomas Avery, the missing employee. He walked slowly to Marcus's desk, stared directly into the camera, and sat down. The recording ended there. The footage was never released. Officially, it doesn't exist. But rumors spread among employees. Many refused to work overnight shifts. Some resigned entirely. Even today, security guards occasionally report strange alarms on the 13th floor. Most ignore them. A few investigate. And according to those who still work in the building, The cameras sometimes show two figures walking together down the hallway. One is Thomas Avery. The identity of the second figure remains unknown. Han van Outro. Those were three disturbing mystery stories that get darker with every minute. Which story disturbed you the most? The voice coming from apartment 307, the missing hiker's final photographs, or the security footage nobody could explain? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed these dark mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next stories involve people who uncovered secrets they were never supposed to find. Until next time, stay safe, and don't trust every mystery that gets solved. Sometimes the answer is far more terrifying than the question.